morning, everybody. That's better. Good to see you. Welcome in. We have a super crowd. So glad for everybody that's here. What a beautiful day to worship God. Before we jump into our text, let's go to Him together in prayer. Our loving Father, we're grateful for a gorgeous day with which You blessed us. We're thankful for our church family, for our earthly families, and for every blessing that You shower down upon us. We know You take care of us because You love us, and it's a privilege to be called Your children. We're thankful to have the chance to open up Your word, the words of life. You have all the answers. We don't. Help us to have an open mind and encouraged to be encouraged in the areas where we're doing right and to be challenged in the areas that we need to correct. We love You and we depend on You. We thank You and we praise You. Through Christ we reach out to You. Amen. Okay, so we're in 1 Kings chapter 22. I would like to say we're finishing up chapter 22 this morning, but we're kind of not, almost all of it. But 1 Kings 22, and before we get into it, though, I want to mention to you, a lot of times in this Kings and Kingdom study, I've made comparisons to what we were just talking about, the boys up here, with the Civil War in America. You have a united Israel under the first three kings, but even going back to the period of the Judges, there's really just this disconnect in philosophy between the North and the South. And you see that in our own country from the very inception of it. There's just this disconnect in ways of thinking in the North and the South. Tensions build, and then it's just, just like what happened in our country. Well, if you'll let me rewind in our nation's history from about the mid-1800s, almost, not quite 100 years, we will go to Revolutionary War, right, guys? And in the Revolutionary War, obviously, you have two sides. They're the British and the Americans. Tensions are hot, they build, and there's this nasty, roughly decade-long war that's fought over independence in America. But it's interesting, you fast forward then to the wars that I'm a little less interested in, but very grateful for. Please don't take that the wrong way. The World Wars, and what are tensions like between America and Great Britain during the World Wars? Quite literally, we are the allies, right? We're a part of the allies together. Isn't that crazy that we were sworn enemies? Not that far back, about 150 years, a little over 100 for the First World War. Complete enemies, and then we become allies with one another, and really to the present, terrific friends and working partners together. It's strange how time can heal so many wounds. Well, we're in 1 Kings chapter 22, and we see something similar here like what we do with America and Great Britain. In the early years, Judah and Israel, they're just at each other, and they're still upset over the divide. There are wars that are going on, and by this point, they find a better way of working things out. They come together as allies of God's people. So we're in 1 Kings 22. We're dealing with the section of the prophets. We've looked at the anonymous prophets in this range going back a few chapters. And then we get to the very familiar prophet of Elijah. We have a new prophet to discuss today with Micaiah. 1 Kings 22, first verse. Now 3 years had passed without war between Syria and Israel. I hate to do this each class, but I think it's helpful just to remind ourselves the major figures who are involved. Who's the king of Syria right now? Not Mr. Hur, but another Ben. Ben-Hadad, good. So you have Ben-Hadad, who's the king of Syria. Man, that guy is just a mess. He's a constant problem to Israel and fighting these wars against them and taking their people and their stuff. Well, finally, Israel, her hand's kind of forced just to put her foot down, and God's fed up with the Syrians too, even though Israel hasn't been what she should be toward God. And the Lord says, look, I'm going to empower you. I'll help you out here. And sure enough, they kill over 100,000 Syrian soldiers, and they even capture the Ben-Hadad king that's been a real problem to them. And then the king of Israel, what's his name right now? We've had him for several class periods. We're about done with him. Ahab, who's been the worst king that Israel's had, believe it or not, to date. Ahab has taken Ben-Hadad as a prisoner, and he can do anything he wants with him. What do you think Ahab ought to do with Ben-Hadad? just hang him, just cut his head off, you know. And it's not even like mean-spirited. This is just justice that would come to this guy. Think some of the ruthless dictators we've had around the world through the centuries, and when they're captured, what should you do with them? It's just justice. Kill them. And that's what God expects him to do with Ben-Hadad. But instead, Ahab makes a treaty with him and just sends him off scot-free to go home. And part of it is Ben-Hadad's made all of these economic promises to him. Well, we'll do that. We'll give this back to you when we were naughty and took these things from you. Oh, okay, we'll see you. And he sends him off and he goes home. Only problem is, when he gets home, and we haven't gotten into this, but we'll see today, he hasn't followed through on the commitments that he made. Go figure. Turns out Ben-Hadad's not a trustworthy guy. He should have taken care of him when he had the chance. But God tells him this, because I gave my enemy and your enemy into your hand to take care of justice, and he escaped on your watch. Now, his punishment is going to be yours. And what would have come on his people is now going to come on your people. So here's where we find ourselves in chapter 22 in the first verse. 3 years passed without war between Syria and Israel. And part of the reason for that is you've had the Israelites put a whooping on them last time they met up. I think they're probably a little scared of these guys now. And so they don't bother them anymore for 3 years. But they haven't also fulfilled the conditions of the treaty that they made with Israel and the king Ahab. Verse 2, then it came to pass in the 3rd year, this is in this peace treaty, that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, went down to visit the king of Israel. I'd like to talk more about this week. I'm not going to, because this week we're looking at things from Israel and Ahab's point of view. Whenever we get back together, we'll be looking at the matter from the perspective of Jehoshaphat and Judah's scene. And that will be in 2 Chronicles 17. And I'll remind you of that at the end of class. That'll be a part of what we're going to read. We'll jump to the parallel of this. But again, that's from Judah's perspective as compared to Israel's. But I do want to make mention of this, and we'll cover it more thoroughly next week. There are 2 reasons why it makes a lot of sense that the king of Judah is going to go down to meet up with the king of Israel. Number 1, there's been a marriage alliance made between the 2. And so the families are used to spending more time together, number 1. Number 2, while Israel is greatly struggling militarily, economically, socially, morally, spiritually, in every way, Judah is thriving right now because she has the religious side of things figured out. And therefore God is blessing her societally, morally, economically, militarily, in contrast to Israel. And when you're weak, you want to have strong military partners. And I don't mean this as a slight, but Canada. It's in Canada's best interest to be good friends with the United States. Again, I would say don't take this the wrong way. I wouldn't call Israel weak, including militarily. I think there's a lot of strength there. But I believe it's in Israel's best interest, a very small state, to have the United States as an ally. Of course, today, not Great Britain anymore, but the United Kingdom, so on. Okay, you get the point, right? Well, it's in Israel's best interest. She's very weak right now to have a kind of super player, a world power player, at least in the Middle East right now, of Judah on her side. So it came to pass in the 3rd year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, went down to visit the king of Israel. I'm going to switch over to our map that we've been using quite a bit for our class. And Roy, this is another one of those strange-sounding instances. The king of Judah is abiding in Jerusalem, and that's just about in the center of the map, not exactly. In Jerusalem, and of course we know by now that the northern section, even though we don't have the political divide listed up here, the capital of Israel is in Samaria. And there's a distance of, you can tell, roughly 35, 40 miles that separates the 2 of those. So you have the king of Judah in Jerusalem going down to, we would say up to Samaria. But this is one of those instances in the Bible where the ups and the downs aren't typically being stated because of geographical direction, but in elevation. Jerusalem's the city of 7 hills. You have an elevation surrounding it of a good 2,000, 2,500 feet above sea level, and you're going to go down considerably from there. Still plenty above sea level, but considerably go down to get to Samaria. Verse 3, and the king of Israel said to his servants, do you know that Ramoth in Gilead is ours? Okay, look back up on your map, and this is going to be on the right side of the screen, about 2/3 of the way up. You see Ramoth in Gilead. Again, that's the east side of the Jordan River. So that's a city that belongs to us. He's talking to his servants. Do you realize this? But, he continues, we hesitate to take it out of the hand of the king of Syria. Well, they shouldn't have to be taking it out of his hand. I ask you to go back to chapter 20 of 1 Kings. 1 Kings 20. And this is back on the battlefield or right after it between the Syrians and the Israelites. So you have as rulers Ahab versus Ben-Hadad. In verse 34, after the Syrians have been defeated, Ben-Hadad has been taken into custody. 34, so Ben-Hadad said to him, that is to Ahab, the king of Israel, the cities which my father took from your father, I will restore. And you may set up marketplaces for yourself, and Damascus is going to be free trade possibilities, as my father did in Samaria. Then Ahab said, sounds good to me. I will send you away then with this treaty. So he made a treaty with him and sent him away. The promise that he's made in this treaty is, I'm going to give these cities back to you, one of which is Ramoth Gilead. And now here we are 3 years down the road, and the king of Israel, Ahab, is talking to his servants saying, hey, you know, Ramoth Gilead, that's ours, it belongs to us, and we need to go take it from the king of Samaria. He shouldn't have to do that. But this shows you that Ben-Hadad has not remained true to his word and the terms of the treaty. They want to take this land back, but he says, we hesitate to do so. Why do you think there's a hesitation on the part of King Ahab? Why not just go grab it? It's yours. And furthermore, he said you can have it back anyway. Why do you think he's hesitating? All right. So maybe he thinks he's not going to hold true to his word if he goes to officially take it back. Very good. There you go. And perhaps information's already been given to him. He's not going to concede it back to him, and he's probably militarily afraid because remember, Israel is in tatters right now. Her military, it was God's empowerment that caused them to win. He hasn't received any further word from God that he's going to be blessed. In fact, he's received a curse from God, it sounds like now. And Syria still has a very powerful military, even though Israel won the war that the two fought against one another. So, yeah, it seems, Roy and Justin, that he can use some help because the king's not holding true to his word. Verse 4, so he said to Jehoshaphat, that is Ahab, the king of Israel, says to Jehoshaphat, don't forget who's the king of Judah right now. And some of these, when you get the interactions between the two, it can get a little confusing. Ahab, king in the north, Jehoshaphat, king in the south. Jehoshaphat's come up from the south, probably to the capital city of Samaria to have this conversation now with the families that have been united in marriage. He said to Jehoshaphat, will you go with me to fight at Ramoth Gilead? Now remember, I know we haven't read all the details. We'll get into that next week. But in the south, you have a growing military power. She's formidable. And so it would be kind of like a Canada or an Israel asking, hey, the United States, hey, you want to go with us and get involved with this? Which might be a little more like, in the case of our neighbors to the north that we love, will you go fight this for us? Maybe what's meant by that, Roy? In Ramoth Gilead, you're looking at, I believe that would be Manasseh, if I'm not mistaken. Check me on that. You'll probably have here I could tell you probably really quickly. Manasseh, Gad. It's been a few years. Let's look at it real quick. Do you have a map in your Bible? I should have one in mine too. There we go, the 12 tribes. Yes, Manasseh and Gad. So Ramoth Gilead, according to mine, it's a funny border for East Manasseh. over here, and it dips down enough, and Gilead's on one of those little islands that comes up there for Gad. Yeah, but it's about a borderland of Manasseh and Gad. Reuben's the other one. I was foggy on that one. Reuben is the farthest one to the south on the east side. Yeah, thanks, Roy. Any other comments here or questions before we move on? Okay, so Ahab asked Ben-Hadad, hey, I need some help. In other words, maybe I need you to fight this for us. Would you be able, would you be willing? Listen to Jehoshaphat's response to the king of Israel. I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. Ooh, that's good news to hear from a really strong big brother. When you're the little weakling. I'm here to help you out. Whatever I have is yours. And probably in part what he's thinking here is we're family. And that's the way family works. Your family is my family, and your nation, my nation. We're side by side. We fight together in whatever enemies it is that we face, which sounds really nice, doesn't it? Here you have these sisters that have been fighting with one another, these two countries, for a good period of years near it now. What are we looking at? About 100 years. They've been a little bit over by this point. So it sounds kind of good. This really isn't, though. Turn over to 2 Chronicles 19. This is, again, the parallel of this text. And 2 Chronicles 19, there's more detail often given in the Chronicles. And in verse 2, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, has a prophet by the name of Jehu to come give him some information. But Jehu, the son of Hanani, the seer, went out to meet him and said to King Jehoshaphat, should you help the wicked and love those who hate the Lord? Because of this, wrath has gone out against you from the Lord. And by the way, he's talking about his alliance that's taken place with Ahab. There's a great lesson in this for us. Just as it's no good for us to participate in evil as God sees it, it's no better for us to condone or to associate with evil that's being done. And he can see us as just as guilty if we connect ourselves with those doing these things and don't try to steer them in a better path. What we'll find next week is Jehoshaphat's a terrific guy and ruler, so I don't want to get this twisted. He's a godly man, but he makes a mistake here. He aligns himself with a wrong person who has aligned himself against the Lord, and God's not happy with that. So as we go back to our text, in 1 Kings 22, Jehoshaphat, when he's asked, will you go up with us and fight against this common enemy? Jehoshaphat says to the king, hey, listen, you and I, we are tied together all the way to the end. Well, when that's a wicked person, that's not a great thing. He has a poor alliance here, and God's upset about it. But we'll talk more about that next week. Verse 5 of our text for today. And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, please inquire for the word of the Lord today. And this gives you an idea of what type of king Jehoshaphat is. He has this close tie to the Lord, and when he's going out into battle, he wants to get information, true information from God, and he's going to follow that, or usually. So he says, hey, let's get information from the Lord, what he has to tell us. Well, remember where they are. They're in the territory of Israel. And I know this has been some time back in 1 Kings, but what have we learned about the prophets of God relative to Israel? When the golden calf worship is instituted by our first split ruler in Jeroboam, what do the prophets, the priests, and the devout religious people do? Those in Israel, what do they do whenever the false worship is said? I mean, it's like you can't even hardly, can you? I don't know that you can fully even stay in the country and still worship your God truly. So what do all these devout people do, especially the priests and the prophets? Very good, Cindy. They defect. They say, all right, we're going to find a new home then. And they leave and go to the south. So here's what we have. Jehoshaphat has left the area of the devout worship of Yahweh, And he goes up to this place where this pseudo-worship, and that's not even to take into account the worship of the Baals and the Asherahs and all that stuff, and Ahab and Jezebel have had a huge part in. But the golden calf worship is still going strongly, and they have all these priests and prophets who have defected, remaining true to God to the south. And Jehoshaphat, the king of the south, goes up to the north, and they're talking about going into battle, and he says, hey, we need to figure out from God what it is that he wants us to do here. Well, there's a problem. All of the true prophets of God have left. Verse 6, then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together. Oh, well, they're still prophets. Oh, that's handy. About 400 men. Well, that's news to me. I thought they'd all left. So it turns out we still do have prophets in northern Israel. About 400 of them. And he says to them, shall I go against Ramoth Gilead, east side, to fight, or shall I refrain? So they said, go up, in unison. They're in agreement. For the Lord will deliver it into the hand of the king. And then we get to this sad statement that's made as an inquiry that's listed for us. Who would like to say verse 7, our memory work? 1 Kings 22, 7. Mr. Jimmy. That's a sad remark. I know it's technically a question, but really it's almost a rhetorical one. So he tells Ahab, listen, we need to find out from God, and everyone understands, well, you do that through a prophet in this time. We need to call for a prophet to find out from God if we should go into battle. So Ahab says, sure, I got 400 of them over here. And he calls them in, and they all are in agreement, we need to go to war. And Jehoshaphat said, no, we need a prophet to tell us whether we should go to war. What does he mean? They just had 400 prophets say, yeah, sign off on it. Why is Jehoshaphat not satisfied with the unanimous 400 prophet announcement? Okay, all right, that's, when everyone's in agreement, sometimes that's cause for pause, right? Bingo, Justin. So for those who might not have heard it, he says, but all the prophets left, didn't they? Essentially what he's saying. So what kind of prophets are these who are giving this answer? Now, I don't believe these are prophets of Baal and Asherah, because you look back in chapter 18, there are 850 of them, appears all of them, that have been slaughtered. I think they're all gone still by this point. These are prophets, but what kind of prophets? Religiously speaking, there's still the golden calf worship that's alive and well in Israel. And these are still prophets of a false god outside of Baal and the female counterparts, the Asherahs. It could be, yeah. I mean, and there could be even others beyond that, yeah. And there could be some worship of God that's mixed in with that, but as if that's going to please God, and these are still true, unadulterated prophets. So Jehoshaphat realizes this. He's a part of a country where the true worship of God is going on, and he's not satisfied with these essentially pagan prophets telling him, oh yeah, you'll be fine, go up in battle, as if God's really communicating through these people. But isn't that a sad thought? And it gives you an indication of how bad things have religiously and morally gotten in Israel. Jehoshaphat says, is there not still one prophet left in all your land who's true to God? Well, funny you should ask. Turns out there is. There's one. That may be it. And we're also going to find out why this one is left. You might say, well, why is he still there? Is he really a true prophet of God if he's still hanging out in this pagan religious environment? And we're going to find out that he's being forced to stay there right now. But verse 8, so the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, that's Ahab speaking to the king of the south, Jehoshaphat, there is still one man, Micaiah, the son of Imlah, by whom we may inquire of the Lord, or of Yahweh, the true and living God, not the silly fake God with horns coming out of his head. We can ask Micaiah, and he will tell us. Before we read what comes next, I want to pause here and be reminded of the way Ahab's recently been acting. Ahab lives in Samaria with his wife Jezebel, and that's their main residence. There's a palace found there. In fact, we'll read a little bit later on. Beautiful. It's called an ivory. It's an elaborate, super expensive dwelling. But we've also recently encountered, in addition to that, they have a second palace. This is their getaway. They're home away from home in Jezreel. And they have all this land that they get to enjoy there, but Ahab has a problem because every time he looks out his window, he sees this amazing field that's being used for a vineyard. And he thinks, man, in my secondary home, if I could have a vegetable garden out there, my life would be perfect. But this belongs to a guy named Naboth. And this goes back to our last chapter, right, in 21. And so he goes to Naboth and he says, look, I'll buy this from you, or if you want, I'll trade it to you and give you a land that's even better than this one. He says, dude, this has been in my family for half a millennium. This is the inheritance of my fathers. No, I'm not selling it to you. No, I'm not trading it for anything else. It doesn't matter how much or what land you offer to me. So Ahab turns around and goes home, and he has his head drooped, and he goes in his room right past the dinner table and shuts the door, and he lies down on his bed, and then he turns away from the door. He's acting like a little kid. Doesn't get his way. Everything he wants. I'm sure he's had a pretty pampered life. And that's when his lovely wife, always so thoughtful and kind, Jezebel, comes to the rescue. And she comes into his room and she says, oh, hubby, what's the matter? And he says, well, I'm not hungry. Oh, why are you not hungry? I didn't get what I want. Oh. So she sweet talks him and she says, well, don't you worry about it. You don't need to pay for that. That's the problem. I'll get it for you. It'll be a present. And she murders Naboth. And it doesn't appear Ahab has anything to do with that, but when he finds out, he's not upset. He doesn't seek to bring those guilty to justice. He says, all right, I'll take it then for free. That works out really well. And God condemns him for that. The point of which, though, is this. It seems like the longer he lives, the more he becomes like a spoiled brat, resorting to his earlier years. Now listen to this. So he's talking to Jehoshaphat, and he says, yeah, there's still one prophet of God in Israel, but I hate him. Well, that's strong, because he does not prophesy good things concerning me, but evil. I don't like him at all because he's mean in the things he says. He doesn't like me. He is, the poor baby, right? He wants people that are going to say nice things about him, especially prophets. Well, Jehoshaphat gives him, someone consider it mild, I'd say maybe a little bit of a strong reprimand. And he says, let not the king say such things. From one king to another, you shouldn't be talking about God's servants this way, who are just speaking his word. And of course, he sees beyond it, and he sees the childish behavior of his new family member. Then the king of Israel called an officer and said, bring Micaiah, the son of Imlah, quickly. I'm sure he doesn't want to do it, but he wants the help of Judah, so what else is he going to do? The king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, having put on their robes, sat each on his throne at a threshing floor at the entrance of the gate of Samaria, and all the prophets prophesied before them. Now Zedekiah, the son of Kenaanah, had made horns of iron for himself. And he said, thus says the Lord, with these you shall gore the Syrians until they are destroyed. So he takes metal and melts it down, and with a mold, he creates these horns. But it mentions for himself. So he forms these horns, and I don't know if he's holding these or he has some apparatus strapped to his head or what, looking like a complete moron with these horns sticking out of his head. And he says, well, here's what God says. You're going to be like you're going to be like a bull running through the area and goring. You're going to, like in a stampede, take care of the Syrians until they're destroyed. And all the prophets prophesied so, all 400 of them in agreement, saying, yeah, you need to go up to Ramoth Gilead and prosper, for the Lord will deliver it into the king's hand. Then the messenger who had gone to call Micaiah spoke to him, saying, now listen, you can come prophesy, but here are the rules when you come talk to the king about the word of the Lord. I want you to understand the words of the prophets with one accord, 400 of them, encourage the king. Maybe a little bit of leading the witness going on here. Trying to coerce him to say nice things, to be like the crowd. Justin, going back to what you say, when all are in agreement about what's true or about what ought to be done, that's often the very thing that is as false can get. Please let your word be like one of them and speak encouragement. He doesn't say this, but I'm sure it's understood for once. Verse 14, and Micaiah said, as the Lord lives, whatever the Lord says to me, that I will speak. Then he came to the king, and the king said to him, Micaiah, shall we go to war against Ramoth Gilead, or shall we refrain? And he answered him, go and prosper, for the Lord will deliver it into the hand of the king. And I like in the New King James here, you may have it in yours, the exclamation point that's put. He seems a little overeager with this message. Well, we're going to find out, even though he's saying exactly what the prophets did, it's taken in complete sarcasm to the king. It's not actually meant. He's not being genuine, and the king knows this, the prophet knows this, everybody knows this. He doesn't mean what he's saying. It's, oh yeah, what they said, go try it and see how that works out for you. So the king said to him, how many times, it sounds like they've had this interaction of sarcasm before, how many times shall I make you swear that you tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord? And then he gets serious. He says, okay, so you want to know what God says? Here's the way it's going to unfold. He said, as a seer, another name for a prophet, and they're called that for a reason, seers see the future. And so he says, as a seer of God, I have seen all Israel scattered on the mountains, as sheep that have no shepherd. And the Lord said, these have no master. Let each return to his house in peace. I realize this is going to sound like a dumb question, but humor me if you don't mind for just a moment. It's important, I think, to get the illustration that's being provided. So this analogy is with shepherd and sheep. Okay, so what's the role of a shepherd toward sheep? Or how do sheep see the shepherd? Master. Good. This is our leader. This is the one who watches over us. This is the one who takes us. And, of course, sheep, the role of them is to follow them, to be underneath them. If they have no shepherd, they have no organization or no leadership. They're scattered, and there's just a big mess. So, in the analogy that's being provided, who are the sheep? We're directly told that. Who are the sheep here? The people of Israel. Okay, good. And so who would their shepherd be? So he says, you want to know what's going to happen if you go up to battle. Well, here's what I saw as a seer of God. The people of Israel, the sheep, were scattered, and they had no shepherd. They had no leader, no king. But that's not true when the battle starts, because the king goes into battle. What's he insinuating about what should take place here? The king will die, is what he's saying if he goes into battle, which is completely the opposite of what everyone who's in agreement, the 400, have stated. Verse 18, and the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, did I not tell you what would happen? That he would not prophesy good concerning me, but evil. Well, have you ever given consideration, O king, that maybe the problem is you and not all the prophets of the Lord? Then Micaiah said, therefore hear the word of the Lord. And what he's going to tell him is, I love this. This is so powerful. It's like in the book of Job, chapters 1 and 2. We have no idea about the battle that's going on for our souls. If only we could step into heaven's throne room as a fly on the wall and just to listen to some of these conversations and these strategy sessions that have gone on. Listen to this. Micaiah said, here's what's going on behind the scenes. Here's what took place in heaven's throne room. Hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne and all the host of heaven standing by, on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who will persuade Ahab to go up that he may fall at Ramoth Gilead? In other words, God says, okay, I've already mapped this out, and Ahab, he's going to die, and I'm going to have him die at Ramoth Gilead. Who has a plan to make this happen? And so they start responding one by one. One spoke in this manner, another spoke in that manner, different ideas, different plans. And we understand it's not that God needs help to do anything, but he allows help to be given to him, and whether that's with angels or I think we're going to find out other sorts of entities. Verse 21, then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, I'll take care of it. Let me have him. I'll persuade him. The Lord said to him, in what way, or what's your plan that you suggest? So he said, I'll go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And the Lord said, all right, you shall persuade him and also prevail. It's your choice. Go out and do so. Two things here. Number one, we know the Lord and his character. He's not a liar. He doesn't condone lying. Number two, we know that of those innocent creatures called his angels, Psalm 148 tells us those are created beings also, that they're pure, the ones that remain true to God, and they're not going to do such a thing either. And to me, that only leaves one alternative. Who do you think this other spirit might be standing before the Lord saying, hey, I'll go lie to this guy and make sure he dies. I'll kill him. Let me have him. Job 1 and Job 2. Look at the heavenly scene, the throne room, and all of these angels, and also, we're told, Satan comes in among them. Now, I will say this. There are some different ideas and interpretation of this passage, but what makes the most amount of sense to me is this is Satan saying, I have no problem lying to him to make sure that he dies. And God doesn't say, oh, that's a right way of handling things. He simply says, I'll let you go do your thing. It's his permissive will. It's the same thing involving Job when he says, hey, let me have him, but he says, actually, first, if you will do all these terrible things, God says, I don't do that kind of stuff to my people. And he says, well, okay, I'll let you go out and try your plans. I think it's the same thing that's going on right here. It takes place multiple times in the book of Job. But do you understand, even though we're not told much about this, this is what happens with every one of us on a regular basis. Isn't that something? Verse 23, therefore look, the Lord has put a lying spirit in the mouth of all these prophets of yours, Micaiah says to Ahab, and the Lord has declared disaster against you. But wait a minute, I thought God doesn't do those bad things. Look back at the book of Job. Multiple times it's stated, including at the end in chapter 42, all the adversity that the Lord had brought upon Job. But you look earlier in the book, and it's Satan that does all of these things. There are a number of times in the Bible where God stated to do something, not when he hands-on does it, but through his permissive will, he simply allows it to be done through sinful choices that others make. I believe that to be the case right here. It's not the Lord that directly sends out lies, but through his permissive will, he allows Satan to work, and he allows these 400 human beings to make the choice to do the wrong thing. He doesn't tell them to do it, nor does he encourage them when they've done it. But whether it's a good thing that's done or a bad thing that's done, the will of God has always worked. Think about all the sins that are committed to put Jesus on the cross. The will of God has worked to save our souls. God doesn't do a single one of those bad things, but he takes all even bad things and uses them for the good of his people. Verse 24, now Zedekiah the son of Kena'anah, bless you twice, went and struck Micaiah on the cheek and said, which way did the Spirit from the Lord go from me to speak to you? This might not excite you, but as a preacher, this excites me because this is a preacher battle right here. And you have one who walks up to the other and he gives a preacher punch right in the face. I don't know if this is open hand or with a closed fist. And then he says, hey, I'm not sure. I didn't notice when God left me to enter into you. What way did he go out when he left me? That might not excite you, but as a preacher, those are fighting words. Okay. And then we have a pretty nice preacher comeback also. And Micaiah said, indeed, you shall see or know what way he went out. And that day when you go into an inner chamber to hide, double burn there. So again, you might, I don't know, I find this really fascinating, though, the preacher battle. 26, so the king of Israel said, take Micaiah and return him to where he was, what was going on, to Amon, the governor of the city, and to Joash, the king's son, and say, thus says the king, put this fellow in prison and feed him with the bread of affliction and water of affliction until I come in peace. This defiant, arrogant, no good. He says, it doesn't matter what you say. They say, I'm going to win. I'm going to win, and we'll come back and talk about it later. But he takes him back to where he was before, in prison. Why is this faithful servant of God and this prophet still in Israel? He's in prison. He doesn't have his freedom anymore because of his stand for truth. He can't leave this place, even though I'm sure he would love to. But Micaiah, the prophet, said, if you ever return in peace, the Lord has not spoken by me, which he puts himself on the line for capital punishment here. This is how strong his faith is in the Lord. God has spoken, and I assure you this is the last time we'll ever talk again, is what he's saying. And then he says to all the people, take heed, all you people. He wants them to understand who the true God, yet another showing, actually is. 29. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, went up to Ramoth Gilead. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself and go into battle. He thinks this will be safer if he doesn't have his royal robes on to be sought out. But you put on your robes. Well, that's thoughtful. They won't notice me, but they'll see you. Okay, great. So the king of Israel disguised himself, thinking he'll be safe then, and went into battle. Now the king of Syria had commanded the 32 captains of his chariots. Remember all the allies, 33 of them that have come together from previous chapters, saying, fight with no one, small or great, but only with the king of Israel. Do you recall their conversation just a little bit back? Ahab to Ben-Hadad, my brother, Ben-Hadad. Yeah, I'm your brother. Yeah, we really care about each other. They're going into battle. He says, I don't care if you kill a single Israelite. Just chase after the king of Israel, find him, and strike him down. That's the only one I want dead. That's a great brother. So it was when the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat that they said, surely it is the king of Israel. It's not. It's the king of Judah. But they're chasing after the wrong king. Therefore they turned aside to fight against him, and Jehoshaphat cried out. We'll talk more about that when we look at things from Judah's perspective. And it happened when the captains of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel that they turned back from pursuing him. Now a certain man drew a bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the joints of his armor. Now think about these astronomical odds. It's a random archer who appears not even to be aiming, but just and it hits the perfect spot where there's the gap in the king's armor so as to mortally wound him. You think you can really run from God when he's made a plan on our lives? So he said to the driver of his chariot, turn around and take me out of the battle, for I am wounded. The battle increased that day, and the king was propped up in his chariot, can't get out of there, facing the Syrians, and he died at evening. The blood ran out from the wound onto the floor of the chariot. Then as the sun was going down, a shout went through the army saying, every man to his city and every man to his country. Does that sound familiar? Go back to verse 17. When Micaiah the prophet said, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains as sheep that have no shepherd. The Lord said, these have no master. Let each return to his house in peace. 37, so the king died and was brought to Samaria, the capital city, and they buried the king in Samaria. Then someone washed the chariot at a pool in Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood while the harlots bathed. This is a place where the prostitutes of the city will go out and parade themselves, and it's nasty. And that's where the mess of what's left of Ahab's body is cleaned up. The man who's responsible for so much harlotry, spiritually speaking, with God's people, now gets to get cleaned up in the bath of the harlots. His blood pours out, and the dogs lick up his blood. We don't have time, but look back at chapter 21, verses 17 through 19. That also is according to the prophecy of the Lord. Now the rest of the acts of Ahab, and all that he did, the ivory house, beautiful dwelling, which he built, and all the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? So Ahab rested with his fathers, then Ahaziah his son reigned in his place. Ahab felt like, what does it really matter as long as I have my ivory palace to go back home to? What does it really matter as long as I have my secondary home? Hey, life's good as long as I have my beautiful vegetable garden out my window and I can watch the servants go out there and work really hard. Life is good. Now Ahab is dead. He's fallen into the judgment of Almighty God. He's left his vineyard behind, these beautiful ivory palaces. By the way, if he could have stayed here on earth forever, what do you think his beautiful home would look like today? I'm going to show you. This is believed to be the remnants of this very time period of the ivory palace of Ahab. That's kind of cool, I'm sure, to visit and to look at. You want to go climb underneath there and stay? That'd be a beautiful place you could call home. Listen, when we put our hope in the things of this earth and the promises that are made to us by people who really don't know the Lord and His will, we have what happens to Ahab. We fall into the hands of the judgment of our God, and whatever is here, it goes to nothing anyway, and eventually it's all going to be destroyed. When it comes down to it, all that matters is our relationship with God and our spirituality. Unfortunately, Ahab doesn't seem to have it. However, Jehoshaphat seems like a pretty good guy. Let's find out more about him and things from the Judah perspective of these same events next week. If you will, read the next 10 verses of where we left off. That's 41 through 50. 41 through 50. Okay, here's where things get just a hair complicated. And then 2 Chronicles 17. 2 Chronicles 17 is like 19 verses, not a lot. And I asked for memory work from 2 Chronicles 17, the third verse. Jehoshaphat's a good guy, as contrasted with the memory work we've been doing about Ahab. All right, well, appreciate your great attention. A few comments that were brought out and questions. Any other thoughts that could be shared as we do close about maybe a life lesson that you see from what we've studied today? Bingo. Beautifully stated, Ma, and I disagree. You said it better than I would, so thank you for sharing that. And for those who might not have heard, yeah, there's a difference in God forcing something to happen and God allowing something to happen and God making plans for what's going to happen based on what He knows we're going to choose, even though He did not force us. Thanks for sharing that. Great to have my mother and my niece, also Taylor, with us today too. Okay, anything else? All right, thank you. That's where we'll pick up next week. Enjoyed it with you.